Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It's V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live with my main man, Harley Schlanger. He needs no introduction. You can find his work over at LaRouchePack.com and the SchillerInstitute.org. Harley, how are you, sir? Lots going on. As we're getting closer and closer and closer to the election, we have far left-wing groups that are planning all sorts of chaos, malarkey, and mayhem, as Joe Biden would say. We have Joe Biden, who's been hiding. The Hunter Biden story is not only just gathering steam, it is multiple nuclear level revelations that are happening right now. And the question that many American people are having right now is, why is Christopher Wray not fired? What the hell is Bill Barr doing? Number two. And number three, where is the special counsel that needs to be investigating all this? We have that going on in the U.S. We have bedlam and mayhem exploding in France with the jihadis doing their dirtiest work, Harley, now beheading people in churches. Where do we? Oh, and let's not forget the Azerbaijanis, the Turkish expansionism with the wannabe Sultan, the wannabe Salahuddin himself, Erdogan. Where do you want to begin, man? The world's gone ape, literally.
Well, I think we should start by pointing something out that our opponents might be unhappy to hear. But censorship in this modern age bears with it a price, which
Yes,
is that once you start censoring something, people start wanting to know why and where they can find it.
correct.
So I think in the long run, despite the inconvenience to such reputable sites as X22, SGT Report, some of the others that I'm on regularly, people are going to BitChute. They're going to other places to find it. And as we're seeing now with the attempt to censor the Biden laptop from hell story, people are trying to figure out, well, why are they trying to censor it? How come the Biden family hasn't contested whether these emails are legitimate or not? And I'll tell you why the Biden family is not contesting it, because the media is the one contesting it. You know, to me, the signal example of the failure of censorship is that Glenn Greenwald was on Tucker Carlson last night,
Yes.
and it was an extremely powerful presentation he gave. Now, I know
Yeah.
there are a lot of people say, oh, he's gay, he's in Brazil, he's a leftist. Why don't people recognize that there are some people on the left who don't like censorship? And I'm talking about the honest progressives who are anti war. These are people, Roger Stone is saying that the Trump campaign should be getting their vote, going after the Bernie people, not because you want socialists on your side, but because these are people who share some of the same bigger aims, fighting Wall Street, ending the wars, and certainly protecting the free press. Now, if you look at the people who are censoring, they're actually extremely wealthy people who have made huge fortunes from the so-called free market capitalist system. You know, the I don't really think that Jeff Bezos is a socialist or a communist. He's a globalist corporatist.
Correct.
And the old idea that it's left versus right, really, Trump blew that up in 2016.
It's an old concept. We need to get rid of it.
Yeah.
It's totally Harley. I'm in the firm belief we need to do in this country what they're doing in Italy. We need to get the populace, both on the left and both on the right, together.
You know, V, I said this in 2008. If you could pull together the Occupy Wall Street with the Tea Party, where there was quite a bit they had in common, the arguments about deficits, certain other things, well, you can work those things out. But the idea that we're being looted and ripped off by private interests that control the government, it's not socialists that control this government, although some of their policies are socialist in the way they're run, but they're the richest corporate oligarchs who set up a system of looting. Now, what bells should be ringing when you hear this? Our nation was founded in a revolutionary war against an oligarchy, namely the British monarchy. And what we're seeing today is a resurgence of a British imperial tradition based in the city of London, backed up by American military power to collect debts and destroy the nation state. And this is what Walt Wriston, the former CEO of Citibank, wrote about in the 1980s, a book called The Twilight of Sovereignty. And what did he say? We've got to get rid of sovereign nations. This is what Tony Blair said when he went to speak at the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations in 2004. Sovereign nation states are the enemy of the New World Order. This is what George H.W. Bush meant by the New World Order. Get rid of sovereign states. So it's not just left and right that we have to throw out. There's another point here, which is that if you look at the people that I'm talking about now, the globalists and their corporate cartels, which governments are they trying to get regime change in? The US trying to get rid of Trump, Russia trying to get rid of Putin, and China trying to get rid of Xi. And I personally believe that after the election, assuming Trump gets reelected, which is not something we can assume, we've got to fight for it. But if he gets reelected, I think we're going to see a shift in China policy because he actually understands that we could work with China as opposed to end up in a situation of another war. And who wants the
Correct.
war? The people who are out to destroy the sovereign potential of the US Republic, of the Russian Republic, and the Chinese government.
Correct.
So, all right, the Chinese Communist Party. We don't need a Chinese Communist Party or something like that running the United States. But we were perfectly willing to work with them under the globalization free trade agreement that looted the American economy. But that was done not by the Chinese, that was done by American corporate moguls.
Correct.
Now, if we go back to a sovereign economic policy and bring those businesses back to the United States, then we'll be back in the kind of shape that we don't have to worry about the competition with China, with Germany, Japan, with anyone. So it's breaking with the policies of the old neoliberalism and the geopolitics of the neocons. That's what Trump was elected to do. That's what he tried to do. And that's what they have been trying to stop.
Hmm. No, absolutely correct. I mean, we have factions in every government. At the end of the day, it is a Game of Thrones, and at the end of the day, you're dealing with multiple deep states and multiple jurisdictions throughout the planet. And the only thing that's going to work is an open economic system where nations benefit mutually one from another in trade. And the only ones that want to derail that, Harley, are the globalist grifters with perpetual debt and perpetual war, which is what they make the most money off of.
Well, and they use the money they're making to buy up the politicians.
Yes.
There's no question about that. The difference between what's happening in the United States now and what's happening in Russia is that Putin has the corrupt oligarchs. Some of them are in jail. Some of them changed because they didn't want to go to jail. In this country, they were given a get out of jail free card by Obama and Eric Holder, and they were told keep looting. And in his first term, Trump did not have the opportunity to move against them. And that's partly because he was somewhat dependent on people like Mnuchin and then the whole gang around Gary Cohn, Kelly, McMaster, and others who are now showing their true colors because they're campaigning for Biden.
Yeah, it's
So
incredible.
I think the important point I'm trying to make is if you recognize what Lyndon LaRouche had at the center of his teachings, which is that the big fight in the world is between republics and empires. And it's been that way since Julius Caesar was killed and Rome was turned into an empire. And I'm sure there were empires before that. But what we know in history is that the importance of a sovereign nation is that number one, it puts the interests of its citizens first. But to do that effectively, it doesn't mean you're opposed to other nations or you go to war with other nations. It means you want to trade fairly with other nations because
Right.
that's what's good for your people or good for other nations' people, and their benefit is to our benefit. So the people who are saying decouple with China, go to war with them over the South China Sea or the Strait of
Right.
Taiwan, or be angry at them for whatever nonsense they're doing with Biden. My view is that the problem here is not that so much the Chinese as it is the Biden crime family. And
Correct.
our job is to deal with that. If we deal with the Biden crime family, then we won't have to worry about the Chinese.
Absolutely right. And hard. Where do we go from here? Where does the United States? Where do you think we're going to be going from here? Once Trump gets the second term, which I believe he will. There's so much work to do. And also, could you give us a recap on Europe with France, with Macron, the
Yeah.
situation with Turkey and the Middle East?
Well, that's a big task you just gave me. But let me start with something Roger Stone said at a LaRouche PAC event the other day. Don't assume that Trump has the election locked up. Roger said it's in the fourth quarter and we're behind. The good news is Biden is playing the game of sitting on a lead, and that's Biden's hiding out most of the time, or he's talking to parked cars. He thinks he's in a remake of Cars 6 or something. That's what his campaign has become. But the real question now is for people who want Trump to win, get off your rear ends and mobilize everything as if your future depends on it, because it does. Now, if Biden wins, we're going to go back to Obama 2.0, in which Biden is going to be a place setter. He's going to be sitting there signing things that are written for him by everyone else. And it means more wars, it means more bailouts, it means less sovereignty, and it means unleashing the hounds of hell in the speculative markets who will steal everything that they haven't already stolen. Now, we've got to make sure that he's not elected. The question is, if Trump gets a big enough mandate, including holding on at least to the Senate, then we've got an opportunity to start locking up some of the people in the swamp. And that has to happen. Now, the first phase of that is just to expose them, to show what their game has been. Because in the court system that we have today, with the corruption of for example, the Washington, Northern Virginia courts, you'd never get a conviction of Obama or Biden. But if you expose them fully, and if you're allowed to do that without the censorship, then people will recognize them for the criminal gang they are. Obama was a front man for the most criminal elements of Wall Street. So that's the first thing Trump has to do. Secondly, he has to take power away from the Federal Reserve, which is a central bank that operates on behalf of the most powerful private interests, namely the Wall Street too big to fail banks. We have to make them no longer too big to fail. They have to abide by regulations and laws, and they can't do it because they're sitting on unsustainable levels of debt. And once you pull the plug on that, once you take away the free money from the Federal Reserve that they need to keep the trading operations going, the swindle going, once you pull the plug on that, they're going to be having to eat that debt. And sooner or later, they're going to have a domino effect collapse of the biggest banks. That gives us the opportunity, with a Glass-Steagall regulated banking system, to use the commercial banks as vehicles of investment in the real economy. And if Trump can accomplish that in his second term, clean up some of the swamp and get the banking system functioning again as a generator of credit for real production, we'll have saved our country.
Exactly. Very well said. Harley,
And, and then the other thing, V, of course, is we have to stop these wars. You asked about France. I mean, what you
yes.
have in France is it's estimated by someone I just talked to the other day, who's a security official in Germany, that in France and Germany, you may have between 1,000 and 2,500 people who are in some way or another involved with ISIS and Al Qaeda in the Middle East, who have returned back to France or Germany, or are training people in mosques and other institutions in those two countries. Now, here's the problem. Where do these guys come from? These wars, in a sense, there's an element of irrationality in extreme Sunni Islam, which was partly planted there, has always been there and used by empires to unleash terrorism. But what unleashed it this time was the poorly thought out wars that were launched by Bush and then by Obama. The regime change by Obama in Libya, the attempt to overthrow the Assad government in Syria. These created the basis for terrorists with funding coming from the Saudis and from the caliphate in Ankara under Erdogan. Now, these are still unleashed. The best thing Trump could do in a second term to deal with this would be to work with Putin the way we did for a while in Syria to jointly crush what's left of these terrorists, mop them up, and then do what the Chinese are doing. You know, all this talk about the Chinese human rights violations to the Uyghur population. The Uyghur people who are in these camps in China are people who were part of the Islamic fundamentalist movement. And they're not being tortured or killed. They're being taught Chinese, and they're told if they're going to stay in the country, they've got to get a job. And this is not some fantasy. I've talked to journalists who were brought to China, who went to China and visited these places, including Muslims from the Middle East who said that the Chinese are more generous to the Muslim terrorists that were in China than the Saudis or the Turks would be. So they're trying to mop up the terrorist problem through working with Russia to crush the terrorists, and then taking the people who otherwise are unemployed and susceptible to terrorist propaganda, giving them jobs. So, you know, there are solutions, but they have to start at the top. You need Putin and Trump working together. And then we can see if Xi Jinping will be part of that, if Modi will be part of that, if the Japanese government will be part of that. Macron probably would be part of that because otherwise his whole regime is about to collapse. As for Merkel, she's going to be gone soon. We're going to have a complete reorganization of German politics over the next couple of years, and it will either be part of a British-directed anti-Russian faction, which is what Pompeo and others are trying to organize, or it will be a return to the policy of Germany working with the Russians and working with the French to build a common home in Europe, not a European Union, which has to go. That's got to be dissolved, but a Europe of the fatherlands, as de Gaulle called it, nation states working together for common purpose, but recognizing the importance of their common culture, common language, and heritage.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Harley, any other things that are on your radar screen that you'd want to discuss? Yesterday was that live stream event with Bill Binney, and that was remarkable for those that didn't get a chance to go back and listening to Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe and Barbara Boyd. They were on breaking down the election countdown, some of the things that are at play. Roger Stone was on there as well. Remarkable, remarkable. It's literally the best hour you can spend just getting a lot of information done, folks. That is posted, so you can check that out. But Harley, what else is on your radar screen that we need to be paying attention to as we're literally just hours and days away from the biggest election of our lifetimes?
Well, let me just add that your man CJ got a question into the panel, and people can see it on Rogue Money. We're very thankful that you guys decided to run it because in this era of censorship, being able to get out on multiple platforms the truth is extremely important. Look, I think the most important thing is that if we can put aside the profiles that were created as a part of identity politics, and that's why I'm coming back to this Glenn Greenwald thing. I just did an update on Glenn Greenwald, and some of my friends and viewers wrote in and said, "Why are you praising this leftist?" Well, you'd think that if someone who calls himself a leftist and has been a leftist is coming out with the truth against the censorship that's targeting Trump, that people would embrace him. It doesn't mean that you become a progressive leftist. It means you recognize common purpose. Our nation is great when we have a sense of a national mission, as we did in the transcontinental railroad connecting the east and west coast by rail and building new cities and new potentials in industry, the steel industry, the oil sector, and so on. when we banded together to win World War II and end the Depression, when we had a national commitment under John Kennedy with NASA. These are moments when Americans came together and recognized a common destiny and a common purpose. Now, that doesn't mean you agree on everything, but when you have that sense of a national mission, you can have a legitimate discussion and dialogue, even with people you disagree with. That's been hijacked by a British directed network in the intelligence community. People like Brennan, Clapper, the whole Obama administration, the Bush administration, they represent not American interests, but they represent banking and globalist interests that have nothing to do with what the average American needs or wants. So I think what we're going to continue doing at LaRouche PAC is defining the kinds of programs and policies that will allow our nation to function with a national purpose and to then have no problem working with other nations that agree on the general outline of that purpose. And I think to get there, we've got to win the election. Now, what do you do with 4 days left? Talk to everybody you know and let them know that the guy, if they're going to vote for Biden, they're voting for a policy of war and chaos that's being implemented by a family which did everything they accused Trump of doing in Ukraine. They did it in about 10 other countries, and they've never been charged with it because the people who charged Trump with them, who impeached Trump on Ukraine, are in on it with them. So the Biden family has no. I mean, I heard a joke the other day. Someone said, "Can we begin impeachment proceedings against him before he's elected?" Uh, the way to do that is don't elect him. And
Right?
that's what I would say we have to do.
Exactly. Very well said. Harley Schlanger, the man, the myth, the legend. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, folks, go check him out over at LaRouchePAC.com and the SchillerInstitute.org, LaRouchePAC.com, SchillerInstitute.org. Thank you for listening in. Have yourselves a wonderful weekend.